If your product costs too much to build, you're going to feel it everywhere. Your margins will be too thin to make a profit, your retail price will be too high to compete, and you'll struggle to scale or even to survive. And by the time you realize it, it's often too late because most cost problems can't be patched in the end. They're baked into the design from the start. That's why in this video, I'm going to show you 10 design mistakes that drive up your product cost and make everything harder down the line. Avoid these mistakes early and you'll save money, scale faster, and actually have a shot at your product being successful. Now, these aren't just mistakes that I've seen other people make, and I've made plenty of them myself. And I've seen them show up so often in the hundreds of designs that we've reviewed in the Hardware Academy. The good news is mistakes are part of the process, and each one is a chance to build better habits going forward. Hi, I'm John Teal. I'm a former microchip design engineer who brought my own hardware product to market, and for the past decade, I've been helping others develop and launch their own new electronic products. All right, let's get into it. Mistake number one, over-engineering the design. This is probably the number one way to waste money on a product, and it's especially common with first-time creators who want to make something amazing and include all of the latest features. But what you end up with is a product that's more complex than needs to be and a lot more expensive to develop. For example, one of the most common examples I see is wanting to add wireless charging to a product. It sounds great in theory, and for some products, it's really necessary. But for most products, a simple USB-C charging connector is cheaper, easier to implement, and more user-friendly. Another common trap is choosing an overpowered microcontroller, or even worse, jumping to a full microprocessor when a simple microcontroller would have done the job just fine. You're not just adding component cost, you're also adding more power consumption, more heat generation, possibly a larger printed circuit board, and much more complex firmware development. The simpler the design, the cheaper it will be, and usually the more reliable too. Check the description below to grab your Design Mistakes Checklist bundle. You'll get this checklist here with all of the mistakes that I discuss in this video that drive up your product cost. Plus, you'll get all my other checklists to help you avoid costly mistakes on your design. The link is in the description below, or you can scan this QR code right here. Mistake number two, overly expensive PCB design. The PCB is one of the most expensive part of your product, not just to fabricate, but to assemble also. And it's incredibly easy to let cost spiral out of control if you're not paying attention to how you design it. A board that's physically larger than it needs to be wastes material, and that directly increases cost per unit. But going too small can even be worse. When you shrink the board too far, you start running into layout constraints. That forces you to use more layers, tighter routing, blind or buried vias, or even flex circuits, all of which raise the cost significantly. And don't forget assembly cost. If you mix through-hole and SMT components unnecessarily or use fine pitch packages that require special handling, your PCB assembly costs are going to increase fast. Keep your board as simple, spacious, and conventional as your product allows. Mistake number three is choosing over-specified components. This one's subtle, but it adds up quickly, and a lot of engineers choose parts that are far more capable than really needed just to be safe or just out of habit. That might mean a voltage regulator rated for an amp when your product only ever pulls 200 milliamps at the maximum, or a temperature sensor with precision that you don't need, or a connector rated for outdoor use when your product is only ever going to be used indoors. These things add cost for no real benefit. Multiply that across 10 or 20 components on your bill of materials, and you've increased your unit cost by a few dollars at least. Instead, start with your actual performance requirements. Pick the cheapest part that meets them with a bit of margin, just not 10x margin. And when in doubt, simulate, prototype, and test. Don't overspec everything just to play it safe, because you'll literally pay the price later. Mistake number four, using custom parts too early. I know how tempting it is to design custom batteries, custom chips, or custom radios. Custom design ensures your product is absolutely as good as it can get. But unless you're producing in very high volumes, custom parts are usually a mistake especially early in the process. They add massive engineering cost. They require expensive tooling, they have long lead times, and they often lock you into a specific supplier. For example, a custom battery might look great on paper, but now you need to deal with battery certifications and typically 6 to 12 weeks just to get samples. You can always go custom later when your production volumes justify it, but early on, use off-the-shelf components wherever you can. And by the way, if you'd like help avoiding any of these mistakes, then check out my Hardware Academy where you can get support and training from me and other experts. Mistake number 5, an overly complex or unnecessary display. Displays are one of the most expensive parts of many products, not just in raw costs, but also in what they force the rest of the system to become. If you add a display, now you often need a more powerful processor to drive it. That means more power consumption, possibly a bigger battery, and maybe even a second power rail. Now you need more complex firmware, maybe even a GUI interface. And the worst part is in a lot of the cases, the display isn't even necessary. If your product is intended to be paired with a smartphone anyway, you can often skip the display entirely and just use Bluetooth Low Energy to connect with a mobile app. That app becomes your product's user interface. This won't work for every product, but it's an option worth considering, especially early in development. No display sometimes can mean simpler firmware, definitely better battery life, and a much cheaper product. Mistake number 6 is using brand name parts without a need. Now, this one requires some nuance. I absolutely encourage people to use brand name parts for critical functions like the microcontrollers, radios, power supplies, and anything safety related. But for simple parts like passive components, analog switches, level shifters, or logic gates, using a big name part from Texas Instruments or Analog Devices might not always be necessary. There are a lot of reputable, lower cost suppliers and even good quality generic parts that perform just as well for a fraction of the price. You just need to validate them properly and be careful. That might mean testing a few samples, verifying tolerances, or doing a second source qualification. But in many cases, it's worth the effort for the savings that you get, especially if you're producing at scale. Mistake number 7, not designing for manufacturability. Designing for performance is one thing. Designing for production is something else entirely. If your design looks great on paper, but it's difficult to assemble, solder, or inspect on a production line, it's going to cost more to produce. That might mean slower assembly, more defects, or higher labor cost. Good DFM, design for manufacturing practices, don't just make your product easier to build, they make it cheaper too and more reliable. Mistake number 8, unnecessary mechanical complexity. This is a classic cost driver, especially for enclosures and housings. Sometimes a product ends up with a 3-piece or 4-piece enclosure when a simple 2-piece design would have worked just fine. Or you get a complex mold that it requires side actions, sliders, or collapsible cores, and then there are the fasteners. I've seen products with 12 screws where only 4 would have sufficed, or sometimes screws being used where a simple snap fit would have been okay. Every additional part adds assembly time, sourcing cost, and failure points. A good mechanical design balances function, strength, aesthetics, and cost. Simpler is almost always better. Mistake number 9, skipping manufacturing cost estimates early. This is one of the biggest strategic mistakes that I see. Many entrepreneurs develop the entire product, prototype it, develop the firmware, enclosure, everything before they ever get a real manufacturing quote. And then they're shocked when they find out that the product is going to cost $80 to build when they were planning on selling it for only $99. At that point, it's too late. You've already committed to the design, and redesigning for cost adds delay, revalidation, and always more money. Instead, you need to estimate costs early in the design process. Get ballpark quotes on PCBs, components, enclosures, assembly, testing, packaging as soon as you have a system-level block diagram. Do this before you invest too much money into development, not after. Even rough numbers will help guide you and help allow you to make smarter decisions and avoid expensive surprises. Don't forget to grab your free Design Mistakes Checklist bundle. Whether you're designing the product yourself or outsourcing the design, These checklists are going to help you avoid mistakes and costly redesigns. The link you can find in the description below, or you can scan this QR code. Mistake number 10 is ignoring power efficiency. This one sneaks up on people. If your product isn't power efficient, you'll end up compensating with bigger batteries, larger regulators, heat sinks, and even thermal protection circuits. All of that increases cost. And it's not just hardware. If your firmware keeps peripherals awake when they're not needed or pulls sensors too often, you're wasting power for no good reason. Optimizing power early gives you more freedom to use smaller components, smaller batteries, and simpler enclosures. That means less cost across the board and better battery life as a bonus. If you found this video helpful, then you're probably going to like these other videos in this same series aimed at helping you avoid costly mistakes.